Hello and welcome to another video by Rick Miracle Me. It is the 22nd of June 2019 and lordy, I have to say it several times. There's some crazy stuff going on. When I didn't think the elite who control our world could be any more sinister and bolder and arrogant than they were, as per my investigation, it seems they can exceed themselves in sinister behavior. It's pretty much acknowledged that Trump has issued an attack on Iran. WTH. And apparently, talk about annihilating them, like something the world has never seen. Think about shock and awe in Iraq, and so much more, the relentless destruction in Palestine. And apparently, all over the world. I went on a kind of a getaway vacation last week. I live on the west coast of North Carolina, in the mountains, and I'd never been to the beaches in North Carolina. So me and my significant other, she and I, decided to go over to the beaches, a place called New Bern, and some of the beaches, Atlantic Beach, Beaufort, and a bunch of other communities. And we spent Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and came back to the mountains on Friday. And I had some time to contemplate. Going to the beach, seeing all those people having a good time, the vehicles on the interstates and the highways and the byways. And it made me pause. I said to myself, am I imagining all of what I've been reporting on in my videos? The New World Order series, the book reviews, my live streaming events where YouTube shut me off, and the chemtrailing, sky spraying, reporting. I've been taking photographs and videos of them dumping stuff in the sky since 2005. I have all this on CD, disc, or hard drives. Published many of them. But to be honest, sometimes you have to do a reality check. And I go over to the beach. And I see everybody having a good time at the beach. Going to the shopping stores and the restaurants and staying at a nice hotel right on the water. And you scratch your head and you go, look at all of this. Everybody's out there just living their lives. Pretty much oblivious to some of the stuff I talk about. And I thought, am I doing the right thing? And I was starting to question myself. What's real? What's reality? But I noticed a couple oddities. First of all, the town I went to, New Bern, is significantly Masonic town with all kinds of Masonic buildings and symbols. And I noticed the intense heat. I mean, you ever burnt a piece of paper or something with a magnifying glass? It was a heat like that coming from the sun. And they were dumping chemicals in the sky. The sky wasn't pasty, wasn't blue like it was supposed to be. It was a pasty white. And apparently, if you can just picture this, a gigantic magnifying glass in the sky, some giant being holding it and burning the planet. It seems to me that the dumping of those heavy metals and chemicals in the sky is doing just that. It's crazy. It's June. It's by the ocean. I've spent most of my life in Florida. I've been out on the boat, out on the ocean, out on the river, at the beaches, at my backyard swimming pool. I know what heat feels like. This just didn't feel right. And a few other things, watching the nightly news and paying attention. I had brought my laptop computer, and I witnessed on my computer the daily reporting when I checked my Yahoo email of the press releases and the threats of world war, threats of war with Iran, threats of activity going on with Venezuela, threats to deport millions of migrants, illegal citizens next week, 2 weeks, Trump threatening almost everybody. So I shook myself and I said, I'm not imagining everything. It is all real what I'm reporting on. But it can get a little bit mind-boggling. Meanwhile, I was reading this book, Children of the Light. Children of the Light. Brad Steger, if I'm saying his name right, and Sherry Hansen Steger. I guess that's probably his wife. It's about the startling and inspiring truth about children's near-death experiences and how they illume the beyond. The back of the book says, children who died and lived to tell about it. Here in one startling book are the eye-opening, deeply inspiring experiences of children who passed over to the other side and returned to vividly describe it. Famed author Brad Steiger and his wife Sherry Hansen Steiger, a Baptist minister, interviewed doctors, psychiatrists, pastors familiar with the near-death experiences of children. They also spoke directly to children themselves, who shared their riveting experiences. Now you will be able to see what these dead children saw, feel what they felt, and understand how powerful forces watch over our lives on earth. Powerful forces watching over our lives on earth. And then I think about this looming World War III, all kinds of videos on YouTube, that it's likely imminent. It's going to happen. And apparently it's in line with a goal of the elite, a depopulation event, and in line with the greater Israel coming, if not already here, from the Euphrates in Iraq down to the Egyptian Nile, returning to the ancient kingdom of Judea, the rebuilding of King Solomon's temple, and the destruction of Christianity worldwide. And then I'm reading this here, how powerful forces watch over our lives on earth. So it is a little reassuring when you read a book like this. And then, of course, reading the Bible. You can watch my videos on the New Testament and on Jeremiah on the Old Testament, and my videos I made on Revelation, the last book in the New Testament, and all these other book reviews I've been going over. It can be startling. It can be concerning. It can create fear. And it does make me wonder, and I'm sure other people, why are they doing this? What's going to happen? Why did they buy guillotines? Why did they pass something called Noahide laws? Why can you find pictures of a greater Israel on Yahoo image site? Why is Israel pressuring the United States and Russia and other countries to assist in rebuilding King Solomon's temple? And they have FEMA camps and all kinds of facial recognition systems, beast computer systems, artificial intelligence, 5G microwave transmissions. All of these technologies, potentially weapons of mass destruction to depopulate the planet, as per some biblical prophecies. And then again, I look at this book, how powerful forces watch over our lives on earth. So it does go hand in hand with talking about this kind of thing, children of the light. Children who died and came back to life, or children who were dying and were in and out of this dimension and into another dimension, seeing both of them at the same time almost. So like I said, it can be a little reassuring, but a little also disconcerting as to all these things going on. And I guess the world is what the world is, and what's going to happen is going to happen. So I just thought it might be interesting to take a peek at a little more about reality. Who are we really? Who are these forces bent on destroying us and creating a global world order where they declare themselves the aristocrats of the planet and everybody else was meant and born to be their slaves? Crazy, you think? Well, listen to this. So page 142, some classic cases of near-death research. And the next page, all right, here we go. As students of human experience and as spiritual seekers, we feel that it is always a good thing to remind ourselves that there truly is nothing new under the sun. And perhaps the old maxim applies to psychical research more than any other areas of human interest and exploration. If serious students of spiritual matters will but take the time to examine the available literature of earlier researchers in the field, they will soon discover that many of the contemporary theorists that are being touted as suggesting new truths or as presenting daringly innovative concepts are really very old ideas that have had their time of popularity and rejection more than once before. Some of the most ancient and metaphysical ideas and belief constructs seem to be discovered afresh by each succeeding generation, and many areas of spiritual enlightenment, insight gain, loss, and regain faddish popularity on the mass level of consciousness in what appear to be cyclical patterns of approval and dismissal. So when you talk about religion, you talk about the Kabbalah, mysticism, witchcraft, and all of this stuff, and Zoroaster, and the Islam religion, Christian religion, Buddhist religion, Hindu religion, and all the shamans and witch doctors all over the planet. For the past few thousand years, this stuff becomes popular and then goes underground and becomes popular and goes under the ground over and over and over again. Nothing new under the sun. While we may, with some justification, consider ourselves to be pioneers in various facets of the phenomenology, investigation into the phenomena of ghosts and spirits and demons and interdimensional communication and the activities of witch doctors and people who practice voodoo and magic and UFOs and aliens. Various facets of phenomenology, including the investigation of near-death experiences. At least for our own generation, even a cursory examination of the literature of psychical research soon reminds us that we are traveling in the footsteps of those who have gone before. And unless one pursues an area of research solely for personal ego satisfaction, such a discovery should prove to be gratifying as well as humbling, for it automatically connects one with the timeless and universal brotherhood and sisterhood of fellow pilgrims on earth who have undergone similar mystical and spiritual experiences. The Journal of the American Society of Psychical Research for 1918 contains the remarkable account of a 10-year-old girl named Daisy Dryden, who during the last 3 days of her life in October 1864 experienced numerous out-of-body visits to the other side. Numerous out-of-body visits to the other side. Would you care to know what she saw and what she said? Listen up. Daisy, the daughter of David Anderson Dryden, a Methodist minister, encountered the spirit of her little brother Allie, who had died 7 months before, and conversed with him. So she was ill, laying in the bed dying, and in and out of consciousness, and apparently was visiting with her dead brother Allie, and reporting the information back to her parents and other people. And also, it says here, as well as with many other spiritual beings. The detailed record of the visions and heavenly scenes witnessed by the child were related by her mother shortly after Daisy's death. Although the doctors had assured the Dryden family that Daisy would soon recover from her bout with typhoid fever, she told them that Allie had informed her that she would soon be joining him in the spirit world. Then, expressing a kind of clairvoyance in which she appeared to be aware of both the physical and the non-physical worlds, Daisy wondered aloud if she would still be able to visit her loved ones behind on the earth plane. "I'll ask Allie if it will be possible," she said to those friends and family members gathered around her bed. So she wondered aloud while she's laying there, will I be able to come back here to earth and see my family and friends? So she decided to go into the spirit world and ask her dead brother Allie. After a brief pause, she relayed her brother's answer. He says that it is quite possible that I shall return sometimes, but you will be unaware of my presence. Nevertheless, I shall be able to talk to you. So can spiritual entities come visit us and we don't even know it? That's interesting. Is anybody watching us? Is anybody watching you? Yesterday, today, tomorrow. Something interesting to ponder. 2 days before she died, Daisy's Sunday school teacher came to see her, and before she left, the well-intentioned lady said to the child, "My dear little Daisy, you are about to pass over the dark river." When she had gone, Daisy asked her father what the teacher had meant by the dark river. Reverend Dryden, remember he's a Methodist minister, her father, did his best to explain the metaphor of a river to represent the dividing curtain between life and death. "What nonsense!" his daughter exclaimed, with a burst of derisive laughter. "There is no river here at all. There is no dividing curtain. There's not even a line between this world and the next." So again, here I am on vacation, over by the beach, luxurious hotel, right on the river, pondering, what am I doing all this research? Is it all my imagination? Is there something really going on? A reality check. And I'm reading this material, and I walked away from that pondering to the thoughts in my mind that yes, indeed, everything I've been talking about is 100% real. Even the news where they're about to attack Iran, you can go on YouTube and watch the videos, and the rabbis talking about rebuilding King Solomon's temple so that they can start sacrificing animals to bring about some kind of entity called the Shekinah, the entity that lived in the Ark of the Covenant If you've ever seen the Indiana Jones movie, they open the golden box and some spiritual entities come flying out and killing everybody. And then when they sacrifice an animal, some lightning bolt or fire comes from the sky to consume it. And then some cloud of glory. This cloud shows up and hovers over the sacrifice and proceeds sometimes to speak to the people. My people, I am your God. This is what happens during those sacrifices. So I have learned. Crazy, you think? And then I'm reading this stuff. Back to the book. Stretching out her little hand as if to indicate a clear pathway, she continued her description of the world beyond. What is here is there. I know it is so because I see you all here and I can see the others over there at the same time. When Daisy's mother asked her to explain what she meant by her reference to over there, the child said, "It is impossible for me to explain." And that's interesting, because I've heard that numerous times during my research, that it is impossible to explain it. The spiritual world, apparently the world where we really came from, and the world we're going to after we die. And apparently, according to the Bible and other text, there is a heaven and there is an underworld, a Hades. So I guess it kind of might be important for people to decide where they want to go when they leave this planet. You think? And these things about World War III and nuclear bombing and the Holocaust and all this other craziness going on. I guess people are making their choices. The secret societies and their satanic symbols are everywhere. Crazy? Back to the book. It is so different from our world that I can't make you understand what I mean. Her mother moved to her bedside and held her hand. Dear Mama, I wish you could all see Allie. Daisy smiled. He is quite close to you. Instinctively, Mrs. Dryden turned around, but Daisy continued. He told me that you would not be able to see him because your spiritual eyes are shut. I can see him because my spirit is now tied to my body by a very fine thread of life. The next day, when her Sunday school teacher returned, Daisy informed the woman that her 2 children were present. The teacher's children had gone over to the other side many years before, and if they had lived, they would have been nearly grown up. All of the adults present that day were quite certain that Daisy had never heard anyone speak of them, so she would not have known anything whatever about them before seeing them in the spirit world. When her teacher asked Daisy to describe the children, she could not relate to the girl's description of them. You are describing grown-ups, the lady protested. They were little children when they passed on. Allie explained through Daisy that children did not stay children when they crossed over to the other side. They grew up, just as they do in this life. The Sunday school teacher shook her head in wonder. But my little daughter, Mary, fell and was so injured she could not stand up straight. Daisy smiled and assured her that her daughter was all right now. She is straight and beautiful, and your son is looking so noble and happy. In her report of Daisy's final days, Mrs. Dryden wrote that another family friend who came to pay her respects was informed that her daughter, who had died some years before, was also now an adult on the other side. The mother could not recognize her from the description given until Daisy said, she used to have a mole on the left side of her neck, but she does not have it now. With this added bit of information, Mrs. Dryden declared, the woman was convinced. Mrs. Dryden asked her daughter how she was able to converse with Allie, her deceased brother. I don't hear you speak, nor do you move your lips." Daisy smiled and replied, "We speak with our thoughts." Mrs. Dryden wished to know in what form Allie appeared to her. "He is not dressed as we are," Daisy explained. "His body is clothed in something dazzling white. It is wonderfully bright. Oh, Mama, you should see how fine, light, and splendid his robe is, and how very white." Reverend Dryden cited the psalmist who declared, "He is clothed with light." So apparently, as a spiritual being, when we die and go into the heaven world, if that's where we're going, we're light beings. We glow like a light being, almost like a neon light or something, a bright white light. And apparently it's mentioned in Psalms and other places, I'm sure. And some of the aliens in the books I have shows the alien beings as glowing, bright white light beings. You think there's a connection? Of course there is. "Oh yes, Father," she agreed. "That is very true." So her father, the Reverend, was quoting the Bible. "He is clothed with light." And Daisy said, "Oh yes, Father." She agreed. That is very true. Daisy loved to hear her sister Lulu sing some of her favorite hymns. In one particular stanza, when Lulu was singing about the wings of angels, Daisy began to giggle. So her sister, she has another sister, Lulu, liked to sing, and one of the songs was singing about the wings of angels, and Daisy, lying in the bed, started to giggle. "Oh, Lulu, it is so funny," she says. "We were always told that angels had wings, but it is not so. It is a mistake. Angels do not have any wings at all." Lulu found such an assertion difficult to accept. "But they must have wings, dear Daisy, or else how could they fly down from heaven?" Daisy explained further. "They don't fly. They just come. Do you know, at the very moment that I think of our brother Allie, he is here at once." So all Daisy had to do is think about Allie, her brother who had died, and he appeared. She was living on the edge of death by a very fine thread of light. Fine thread. I guess they say that we all are connected to the other world by a silver cord. You can look that up. I've talked about it in previous videos. So, you think about some of the stuff I've talked about. Magic, witchcraft, aliens, New World Order, globalism, prophecy, biblical text, the different religions, Prophet Muhammad, Prophet Zoroaster of Persia, Iran, Hindus, Buddhist. Makes you wonder. Mrs. Dryden, who had been listening to the conversation between her daughters, wanted to know how it was that Daisy managed to see the angels. Daisy was quick to admit that she did not always see them. "But when I do, the walls seem to vanish, and I can see ever so far away, and I see crowds and crowds of spirits." So in the spiritual world, when you leave this world, if you go where Daisy's going, there are crowds and crowds of spirits. Those spirits who come close to me are those whom I knew in my life, but others I have never seen before. On the day of her death, Daisy asked her mother for a hand mirror. So she wanted a mirror so she could look at herself. Mrs. Dryden hesitated, fearing that the child might be horrified by her pinched and haggard features. But after calmly considering her reflection in the looking-glass for several minutes, Daisy said, "My poor body is used up, like one of Mama's old dresses that hangs up in the wardrobe and never wears again. But I possess a spiritual body, which shall replace my old one. I have already got it on me, and it is with my spiritual eyes that I see the spirit world. even though my earthly body is still attached to the spiritual one. You will place my body in the grave, because I shall have no further use for it, but I shall be clothed in another body, much more beautiful than this one just like Allie's. Mama, darling, don't cry, for if I have to go away, it is my benefit. God knows what is best. The child asked that she open the window for her, and Mrs. Dryden complied with her request. I want to have a last look at the beautiful world, for after the sunrise tomorrow I shall be no more. Daisy requested that her father raise her up a little. Goodbye, goodbye, my pretty world. I still love you, but nevertheless, I don't wish to remain here any longer. And I was reading that. This child, a lot of bravery there. And I think about all these things going on. Maybe today, 5 minutes from now or 5 minutes ago, they were bombing the smithereens out of Iran. Maybe Russia joins Iran and we have nuclear missiles coming this way. My point is, we never know what's going to happen tomorrow. So it is comforting to read something like this and to contemplate the other world, where we're really from. And it's hard to understand why the rulers of our world do what they do. Some of the sinister and horrific things that they do, again and again. World War I, World War II, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, and so many other leaders of countries assassinated, imprisoned, and overthrown. And the citizens never really get a better situation. Seems to get worse where these globalists are taking control of everything. But then again, I read something like this, and it puts things maybe in a little bit of better perspective. Mrs. Dryden's journal recorded that it was 11:45 that night when Daisy called out to her father, "Papa, lift me up. Allie has come to look for me." When the child had been placed as she wished, she asked that someone sing a hymn. "Go and get Lulu," one of the adults in attendance at Daisy's bedside said. "She's the singer in the family." "No," Daisy said in a soft voice. "Please don't disturb her. She's asleep." Then, just as the hands of the clock pointed at 11, Daisy lifted up her hands and said, "I'm coming, Allie." It was at that moment Mrs. Dryden stated that her daughter ceased to breathe. What a story, you think? The heavenly visions of Daisy Dryden made quite an impression upon the psychical researchers of the day. Professor J.H. Hyslop of Columbia University, author of Science of a Future Life, conducted a full investigation of the case and reported that he could confirm every detail. Professor Bozzarno quoted the case in his Phenomena's Psychics 1923, as did George Lindsay Johnson in his book Does Man Survive 1936. And so if you've been watching my videos, you'll know I've looked at a lot of books on psychic research, a lot of books on remote viewing, and these kinds of topics. Books on magic and the Kabbalah and all these other things. So it does seem that there is good and evil in the world, and apparently good and evil in the spiritual world. Maybe there is an underworld, a Hades, and maybe there is a heaven, so it seems. In his summation of the Daisy Dryden case, Johnson affirms that in his mind, this case affords one of the most convincing proofs of the continuation of life after death, and of the survival of all of our faculties that it is possible to obtain. Daisy's artless patter is of infinity more value and far nearer the actual truth than all the learned psychology and disquisitions of scientists and divines. As Jesus exclaims, I thank thee, Father, Lord of the wise and the learned, that thou hast revealed them to the childlike. All right, moving on here. All right, here's another story in this chapter, page 150. Children of the light. People who died or on the death's edge, reporting what they see. Some people are returning from the spirit world. In the Sunday Express of May 26th, 1935, W. Martin of Liverpool, England, wrote of his experience at the age of 16 when he underwent a near fatal accident and perceived his consciousness functioning intelligently apart from his physical body. Today we would say that the boy had a near-death experience. In 1911, at the age of 16, Martin began his account. I was staying about 12 miles away from my home when a high wall was blown down by a sudden gust of wind as I was passing. A huge stone hit me on the top of the head. Martin then found himself somehow above the scene of the accident, and he could see himself lying on the ground, huddled up with one corner of the stone resting on his head. So he sees his body lying on the ground, and a corner of the stone is laying on his head, and he's up above looking down like I'm looking at myself on the TV screen right now. And I've talked about my own personal out-of-body experience. Weirdly enough, Christmas Day, not Christmas Eve, but Christmas Day, I had done charity work all day and wound up back at my apartment in Orlando, Florida. Laid down on the sofa, the lights were on in the living room, the TV was on, there was a big clock in the living room, etc. And the next thing I know is I'm hovering in the air looking at myself lying there. True story. And when I read what's in these pages and I relate it to my own experience, it's quite interesting. And I have discussed this with other friends of mine who also confess to having out-of-body experiences. So they do seem similar. In my case, anyways, I'm floating up there, thinking I could think, and I pondered. I go, wow, I'm out of my body. I thought it was really cool. And I asked myself, well, what can I do next, And I thought, well, I think you can think where you want to go, and you'll swish there, and I'll see what the people are doing where I had spent the day doing charity work. And then I'll come back to my body, and I'll call them up and say, hey, this is what you were doing. I was out of my body. I saw you. That was my plan while I was hovering. Just came to me. So anyways, I looked around, and I noticed the white refrigerator, I could see into the kitchen, had a black top, and I thought that was odd. And that's important later on in my story. So anyways, I thought about where I wanted to go, and I felt myself leave the lighted room, and I'm in darkness, I guess moving. And as I'm in darkness going somewhere, I panicked. I said, wait a minute, did I die? I don't want to die. I want to go back to my body. And swish back into the lighted apartment, and I'm laying on the sofa looking up at the ceiling now. And I sat up, and I go, was that a crazy dream? Was that real? And I remember watching the TV out of my body. I remembered the clock. I remembered the refrigerator with the black top. So I went into the kitchen. I got a chair because I'm not tall enough to see on top of a refrigerator. And guess what? You could write your hand on the black soot. It was located right next to the stove. And grease and dirt. It was black on top of the refrigerator. So I verified that what I had seen in that event was real. And I always figured God gave me a gift that day. There was never anything connected to faith anymore, although I was a firm believer in God and believed that Jesus had come from the spirit world. It was faith. It was just blind faith. In my opinion, God gave me a gift that day. I had proof. I knew I was out of my body. And then I'm reading this book about this guy's experience, looking down, floating in the air, seeing a big rock on his head. So back to the story in this book. Quite a number of people were rushing towards me. I watched them move the stone, and someone took his coat off and put it under my head. I heard all of their comments. "Fetch a doctor! His neck is broken. His skull is smashed." Someone in the crowd appeared to know where Martin lived, so a group of men began carrying him toward his place of lodging. Now all this time, I appeared as though I were disembodied from the form lying on the ground. I was suspended in midair in the center of the group, and I could hear everything that was being said. As the men began to carry Martin towards his room, he heard someone in the crowd remark, "What a terrible blow his accident would be to his parents." I was immediately conscious of a desire to be with my mother. Instantly I was at home, and father and mother were sitting down in their midday meal. On my entrance, mother sat bolt upright in her chair and said, "Bert, something has happened to our boy." So in spiritual form, he thought of his parents, and he just instantly was transferred there. And he's there in a spiritual form. His mother and father couldn't physically see him, but his mother instinctively apparently knew something and said, "Bert, something has happened to our boy." Martin's parents began to argue when his father attempted to dismiss his mother's intuitive flash as nonsense. Mother refused to be pacified, and she told father that if she caught the 2 p.m. train, she would be with me before 3. She had hardly left the room when there came a knock on the front door. It was a porter from the railway station with a telegram saying that I was badly hurt. Suddenly Martin was once again transported. At this time, seemingly against his wishes, he found himself in a bedroom where a woman he knew was lying in bed. Wow, so now he was transformed to a bedroom of a woman he knew who was lying in bed. So he was instantly transformed into this bedroom where this woman was lying in bed, somebody he knew. 2 other women were bustling about the room, and the doctor was leaning over the bed. Then the doctor had a baby in his hands. At once, I had an almost irresistible impulse to press my face through the back of the baby's head so that my face would come out as the same place as the child. So he had this impulse to take his spiritual body and jump into the baby's body. Martin felt deep sorrow and regret when he heard the doctor sign and pronounce the two women in the room. It looks as though we lost them both. So the mother and the child died. The teenage boy again felt the urge to take the baby's place, to somehow enter the body as he had done moments before, to show the doctor that he was wrong. But the thought of my own mother crying for me turned my consciousness in her direction, and then straight away I was at a railway carriage with her and my father. So he thought of his parents, and then he finds himself in the railway carriage, in the car of the train, with his mother and his father. So all you had to do is think about them, and he was transported where they were. He was still with them when they arrived at his lodgings and were shown to the room where he had been put to bed. Mother sat beside the bed, and I longed to comfort her. After a time, the realization came to me that I ought to do the same thing that I had felt impelled to do in the case of the baby. I came to understand that I should climb back into my body on the bed. So he had this impulse that he wanted to get back into the body lying on the bed. At last I succeeded, and the effort caused the physical me to sit up in bed fully conscious. His mother tried to make him lie down again, but Martin said that he was all right. I remarked how odd it was that she had known something was wrong with me even before the porter had delivered the telegram. Both she and Dad were amazed at my knowledge of her intuitive insight. Their astonishment was further increased when I repeated almost word for word some of the conversation they had had at home and in the train. So he was telling them all the things that he had heard and witnessed about them while he was out of his body. Martin also told them that he had been as close to being reborn that day as he had been to dying. So apparently, if he'd have wanted to, he could have got into that baby's body and be reborn. And that's some interesting implications. And there's been some talk about that. These people who control our planet apparently are into some of this cloning and spiritual stuff, kind of from the perspective of the dark side. But do you suppose they could have cloned bodies waiting for them, and then when they die, have the body laying in the next cot next to them, the next bed, and they could just slide on over? And I thought about that, about some of the people that have died recently, like President George Bush Sr., and it did make me wonder if these elites do have this kind of technology. It really makes you ponder and think. Because certainly the sinister, evil component of the spiritualism, witchcraft, etc., the Kabbalah, magicians and voodoo and so much more, remote viewing, apparently is real, and apparently they're using it to their advantage. So this stuff has popped up now and then in my research. It just makes you wonder, what can they do? What do they know that we don't know? He explained that he had somehow been able to observe Mrs. Wilson, who lived close to his parents' home, as she gave birth at the same time that he was out of his body. The baby died, he said sadly, because I would not get into its body. I wanted instead to return to my own. The teenager and his parents subsequently learned that their neighbor, Mrs. Wilson, had died the same day as he had suffered his accident. She had passed on at 2 o'clock, 2:05, after delivering a stillborn girl. So if he'd have slipped into that body, he would have been a female baby. Interesting. And I have heard that if through some of my investigation into reincarnation, that apparently they believe that each time we're reborn, normally we alternate sexes. You're born a girl, you're born a male, you're born a girl, boy, unless there's some spiritual reason you have to be the same sex twice. Maybe some kind of lesson we have to learn in this life. Again, just something to ponder and think about. All right, back to the book. Dr. Manat J. Savage presented the following authenticated case for the January 1907 issue of the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research. And again, if you look at my earlier videos in my series that I began in September 2013, I went over a lot of books on psychical research. It was quite popular from about 1850 to 1840, thereabouts, to 1940, just prior to World War II. And then apparently it seems to have gone underground after World War II. And even the Hitler Nazi regime was into this with the Thule Society, Vril Society, being financed by the Illuminati, Kabbalistic people into mystery religion of Babylon, who worship demon beings, Baal and Moloch, represented by the six-pointed star, even the big statue of the owl in the Bohemian Grove, California, where Alex Jones had snuck in there with a photographer, cameraman, and videotaped the cremation of care where they sacrifice a baby into a fire. Again, it makes you wonder about this spiritual world, what they're doing. I like to look at both sides of this coin, the evil side and the good side, to try to understand it. What do the evil elites pursuing a global world order know that we don't know? What should we know? And if we open our minds, our eyes, and our ears, what kind of power does that give us? What kind of power can we obtain that they don't want us to have? What kind of knowledge do they do not want us to have? It's interesting. All right, so this Dr. Minot Savage writes in the Journal of the American Society of Psychical Research that two little girls, Jeannie and Edith, one 8 years of age and the other a little older, were schoolmates and close friends. In June 1889, both were taken ill with diphtheria. At noon on Wednesday, Jeannie died. In order not to place an additional burden of sorrow on little Edith, both her parents and the physician took particular pains to keep the knowledge of her playmate's death from her. So Jeannie and Edith, and one of them died. Jeannie died and Edith lived, and the parents and the doctor didn't want to tell her of her playmate's death. Get my place in the book correct. To prove that they had succeeded and that Edith did not know of Jeannie's death, Dr. Savage stated, "It may be mentioned that on Saturday, June 8th at noon, just as she became conscious of all that was passing about her, she selected two of her photographs to be sent to Jeannie." So Edith becomes conscious and wants to have two of her photographs sent to Jeannie because she did not know Jeannie had died. At the same time, little Edith, who seemed to be aware of her own imminent death, asked those who would deliver the pictures to Jeannie also to bid her goodbye. Edith died at 6:30 of the evening of June 8th. She had roused and bidden her friends goodbye and was talking of dying persons and seemed to have no fear. She appeared to see one and another of the friends she knew who were dead. Then suddenly, with every appearance of surprise, 8-year-old Edith turned to her father and exclaimed, "Why, Papa, I am going to take Jeannie with me." So Edith knew that Jeannie was going to be joining her. Jeannie. Papa, you didn't tell me that Jeannie was already here." And immediately Dr. Savage concluded his account. She reached out her arms as if in welcome and said, "Oh, Jeannie, I am so glad you are here." Dr. Savage's story reminds us of an account that Dr. Louisa Rhine repeats in her classic work, Hidden Channels of the Mind. So I did go look at my office for some other Brad Steiger books. Irene Hughes's On Psychic Safari, Brad Steiger. A noted psychic's amazing investigations into haunted houses of the 20th century. Haunted houses. You think all this is real? True accounts of benevolent beings from the other side. Guardian angels and spirit guides. Brad Steiger. A barrier of light, from the back of the book, keeps a young waitress safe from a rapist. A murdered son's voice leads a father to his killer. A doctor returns from the dead to save a child's life. Inhabitants of a haunted house get a letter from their guardian spirit that was mailed 40 years before. Oh my, so much in these books. And speaking of Brad Steiger, series number 78, I believe. Series 80? Series 80, I have it on the right here. The Philadelphia Experiment and Other UFO Conspiracies. Brad Steiger, Alfred Bielek, and Sherry Hansen Steiger. So I made a video on this one here, part 80, probably in 2014. And then, of course, Al Bielek. I've talked about him quite a bit, watched a lot of his videos. So apparently in the Philadelphia Experiment, they put microwave transmitters all over a ship, intending to disguise or hide the ship from the enemy's radar during World War II. But what happened was unexpected. The ship disappeared. You can see the picture of the ship there. And turned up at different places in the planet. And when it finally returned to the port in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I guess when it time channels or time travels, things move around. But some of the human bodies were half in and half out of the steel bulkheads. Can you imagine you walking down the hallway and a human being is halfway on the inside corridor? The steel cuts him right in half, and his other half of his body is sticking out the outside. So there's something to this manufactured, created physical reality that apparently can be distorted with electromagnetic energies. Then I'm thinking about 5G and all these other advanced technologies that the powers that be have, the global world order, the installation of 5G, and now they're talking about 6G, including artificial intelligence, controlling everything. It really does cause one to pause. What is real? So back to the book. So Dr. Savage's story reminds us of an account that Dr. Louisa Rhine repeats in her classic work, Hidden Channels of the Mind. So we have another story here. A woman in New York City recounted the 1960 episode in which her 3-year-old daughter was denied the tragic information that her 7-year-old playmate, Anne, a diabetic, had died. So the 3-year-old was not told that Anne, 7 years old, had died. The little girl was not taken to the funeral, and in answer to inquiries regarding Anne's whereabouts, she was simply told that her friend had gone away on a trip. So they didn't want to tell the 3-year-old that her 7-year-old friend had died. It was several days after the funeral when, according to the mother, she sent her daughter to get a particular broom from the hall closet. A few minutes later, she was surprised when the girl returned to her empty-handed. Anne won't let me in the closet. So the girl who died, 7 years old, Anne, would not let her in the closet, she explained to her astonished mother. She's standing in the hall closet and won't let me by. When the mother became convinced that her daughter was not joking with her or just telling a story, she asked her what Anne was wearing. A pretty white dress with a veil. Wow, a pretty white dress with a veil. Seems like she has her light body on, spiritual body on, as we learned about earlier in this book. She answered without hesitation, "That's why we can't go outside to play. Anne does not have her coat with her." According to the mother's account, 7-year-old Anne had been buried in her communion dress. So that would have been a white dress, maybe with a veil. The following day, while she was sitting in the living room, she heard her daughter speaking with someone in the hall. When she inquired, the little girl said that she was talking with Anne. Trying not to become upset, she went into the hall and asked where Anne was. She pointed but said Anne was going out the door. When she took her daughter to the neighbors to play, she confided in the woman about the strange incident. Together we prayed and sprinkled holy water in the apartment. But I had a very uneasy, sorrowing feeling, she told Dr. Rhine. 2 days later, my daughter became ill, and 2 weeks from the day Anne died, my daughter died of pneumonia. Oh my. So what do we know about reality? Again, me taking my trip over to the coast, scratching my head after doing almost 15 years of research, 6 years of videos, and still continuing on every day and seeing the craziness going on in the world. You know, you have to do a reality check and go, everybody else seems like they're just having a good time at the beach or going to the mall or eating in the restaurants. Everybody's oblivious. And the world is so huge. And we only see our reality. We don't see all the murder and bombing going on in Palestine and Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and many other places all over the world. Even on natural news. Mike, what's his name? Website. Apparently there's a lot of starvation going on in Venezuela. A country with a huge supply of oil reserves and gold and other minerals. And the people are dying because of the embargo put on that nation by apparently the leaders of the United States and Israel and the Pentagon and the elite who run the world. And apparently they're about ready to launch an attack on Iran. And apparently Russia has said they will get involved if they do that, and China will get involved. So it does make one pause and say, oh my, what could happen? And then I remember reading the Bible and remembering that I'm a spiritual being. So again, I want to just say, everything that I perceive, as much as sometimes I wonder what I'm doing and I may doubt myself, it all appears to be real. Too real. We all have to kind of come to grips with who and what we are. And if the spiritual world can see us right now, and when we get into the spiritual world, you know, we have to answer for who and what we are, who and what we did, about when we see other people being killed and preparations for a global world order. If people knew, when they get to the other side, do they want to be a coward or a hero? Do they want to have been apathetic and not caring if other people are dying? Or do they want to be brave and have said, I have spoken, I have written letters, I have told my friends, I have fought the fight, trying to save people? It does make you wonder, when you get to the other side, do you want to have any regrets? What you could have done when you were alive to try to make the planet a better place for people? Or were you just concerned with yourself? And do these decisions have any effect on where we go when we die? I know, it's a crazy conversation. But when I went on my vacation, I went over to the beach, I did start doubting myself, wondering, what the heck am I doing? And then the intense heat, and I could see the chemtrailing, the stuff being dumped in the sky, the microwave transmitters everywhere, the Masonic occult symbols all over that town, New Bern, North Carolina, the Shriners building, the Freemasonic lodges, etc., the York Rite, and other buildings downtown, the historic buildings. And I see all the construction going on, all the bridges, all brand new, quite modern, quite impressive. It does make you think. And a thought did cross my mind. All over the United States, they're building all these beautiful bridges and buildings and so much more. Meanwhile, they're dumping chemicals in the sky and apparently planning for a population reduction. And it did cross my mind that they're doing all this construction, all this building, for somebody else. Not us. Because we're going to be gone, it seems. Just crossed my mind. I was thinking, it just like an alarm went off in my head when I saw those huge, beautiful bridges and everything going on. And I looked up and I see the chemicals being dumped from the sky. And I see all the warnings out there and videos on YouTube and press releases in the newspapers about attacking Iran. And I know that Russia would support them, because if Russia didn't support them, Russia would be next. Maybe Russia and China could get in together in cahoots tomorrow and do a preemptive strike on the USA. Or would they wait for the USA to make a preemptive nuclear strike on them? It does pause one to cause. Cause one to pause. You could see how this can be mind-boggling just thinking about it. But you know, when if it does happen and we wind up with a world like a Hunger Games movie, can you imagine sitting in one of those little fenced-in work farms, if you're still alive, saying to yourself or whoever you're with, we should have seen this coming? Well, some people do see what's coming, and some people are speaking up. Some people are aware that they're spiritual beings. And it is important what you do in this life, right up until the end. William Cooper, the author of The Pale Horse, said, if you're not prepared to die for something, you're not living. All right, continuing on. Another chapter. Spirit-like projections to friends and relatives. Now look, I'm not trying to do a audiobook, just an introduction of another book that I've been reading. Children of the Light, the startling and inspiring truth about children's near-death experiences and how they illume the beyond. Brad Steiger, Sherry Hansen Steiger. So let me read a little more. As we have already seen, many children during acute illnesses and suffering have testified to having traveled to other places of reality. And incredibly, there also exist the testimonies of hundreds of witnesses who have claimed to have seen the spirit-like image of a friend or a relative appear before them, while the living physical counterpart of the apparition was known to be as many as thousands of miles away. Stella Libby Rife was extremely close to her cousin Bernice Moore. The girls were, in fact, double cousins. Bernie's father was Stella's mother's brother, and her mother was Stella's father's sister. That's interesting. Double cousins. Since earliest childhood, the little girls have been fast companions and confidants until Stella's family moved from Lansing to Jackson, Michigan. 3 years later, on a December evening, Stella and a girlfriend were home alone. Stella was about to leave her room and descend the brightly lit stairways when she suddenly froze. Standing in the bright illumination stood my cousin Bernice. She stated, Fate, February 1968. I guess that's a magazine, Fate. She looked terrified. I saw her clearly, yet I knew she could not be there. Stella ran hurriedly down the stairs, brushing past the apparition and out the front door. She did not stop until she was a block away from the house. Her girlfriend at last caught up with her and attempted to calm her. Later, when friends stopped by the Libby home, one of the party, a woman who worked for the telephone company, asked if the Libbys were aware that their phone was out of order. Lansing, Michigan, had been trying to call them when the message could not get through. The woman said that she would deliver the message personally. The message was that Bernice Moore had died suddenly that evening. Wow, so she died and she went to see her best friend. Freaked out her best friend. She ran out of the house and ran down the street. So what do we know about reality? When 16-year-old Darcy Braden's car plunged down in an embankment next to a county highway, she spent nearly 36 hours lying at the bottom of a ditch, fading in and out of a coma. So the car ran off the road, she's down in a ditch, and she's going in and out of consciousness. Police conducted a massive search for the missing teenager, but no one was able to locate her until her uncle, Fred Anderson, saw her in a dream and told the authorities exactly where she was. Darcy and her family lived in a heavily wooded area near the small town in the Ozark region of northern Arkansas. She had been elected as cheerleader for the high school athletic teams the previous spring, and in September 1988, with football season going full steam ahead, she had talked to her parents, Howard and Ma Braden, into buying her a used car so she could drive to cheerleading practice and home games. On that terrible night in mid-September, when Darcy had not returned by 1 o'clock in the morning, the Bradens were wishing that they had not yielded to their daughter's request regarding her own automobile. There had been rain earlier that evening, and there was a dense fog had settled in. By 2 o'clock, Ma Braden was fearing the worst. Darcy never stayed out late without permission, and she always called if something unforeseen had come up to delay her arrival back home. Ma Braden's mother's intuition was being activated for a very good reason. The dense fog that shrouded the country roads had made Darcy nervous, and she left her friends almost immediately after the football game had ended. She hadn't even stayed for the after-game dance at the school gym. The young and inexperienced driver became confused and anxious driving the eerie country roads. She was reaching down to turn on the radio to help her feel not so alone when she misjudged a sharp curve. Inappropriate acceleration sent her off the road, completely clearing a guardrail and rolling down a steep embankment that was thick with small trees and dense foliage. Oh my. Darcy struck her head on the steering wheel several times as the car careened down the embankment. Her seatbelt was disengaged, and she was thrown from her car into the ditch. First thing the next morning, the Bradens called all of Darcy's friends to see if anyone had a clue of her whereabouts. My blood literally froze in my veins when we were told, time and time again, that Darcy had left early the night before to head straight home, Miss Braden said. After they checked with local hospitals to see if anyone had been admitted after an automobile accident, the Bradens called the county sheriff's department to report their daughter missing. Within a few hours, the deputies had driven all the possible routes that Darcy could have taken to the farm home. Howard Braden said, "We were now really getting frightened. And although we tried our best to be positive, parents just can't help thinking about awful things like kidnapping, abductions, and even murder. We knew that Darcy was well liked by her classmates and friends, and she was a pretty girl. And we do get some weird sorts of tourist folks up here every now and again. Darcy lay battered, bruised, and only occasionally conscious near her wrecked automobile. Her clothing had been ripped and torn, and she had been thrown into a death's foliage, and her body was covered with cuts. Oh my. Once I saw Cheryl Green, one of my mom's best friends, come walking up to me. Darcy recalled in her report of the incident. She told me that I looked lonely and that she would sit and keep me company for a time. Wow, so she's in and out of consciousness. And Cheryl Green, one of her mom's best friends, came up to her. We talked for quite a while, then I said, "Hey, wait, Cheryl, you died 3 summers ago from stomach cancer. You can't be here talking to me now. I mean, you're dead and all." Wow, that's an interesting turn of events. So while she's going in and out of consciousness, down there in the bushes, nobody can see her or her car, Cheryl Green shows up to keep her company. What do we know about reality? Seriously. Out of here, bug. What was that bee trying to say to me just now? The image of the woman remained with her, and Darcy became convinced that either she herself was also dead, or she soon would be. And then I just seemed to stand up and leave my body, Darcy said. Pretty soon I was looking down on my bloody and battered corpse, just lying there covered with dirt and broken branches. So now she's out of her body. I just seemed to fly through space. It was neat. That's sort of how I felt when I was out of my body. I thought it was neat at first until I panicked and said, "Wait a minute, am I dead?" It was neat. I could see the town below me and all the different farms and stuff. Then, as she passed above the farm of her uncle Fred Anderson, she suddenly felt herself being pulled downward. I heard my Aunt Zoe telling Uncle Fred that there was nothing more he could do until he got some rest. She scolded him that if he didn't get some sleep, he might drive in the ditch, and that wouldn't help get Darcy back. That's weird she should say that. And then I realized that Uncle Fred had been out looking for me. I wanted to hug him and give him a kiss. Fred and Zoe never had any kids of their own, and he had always seemed to treat me so special and loving. My mom said that Fred and I had some kind of special bond. Something told me that it was important for me to stick around while he took a nap. I remember turning my head when he shucked down to his underwear and crawled under the covers. I just kind of floated around in his room, and when I heard him start to snore, this voice spoke to me. It said, "You can talk to him now. He can hear you now." Isn't that interesting? When you go to sleep and you have dreams, and sometimes it seems quite surreal. I have unusual dreams, and I guess with all this research I do and thinking I do, that probably is appropriate. But some of the dreams are just quite bizarre. Makes me wonder. I got a couple books on dreaming. I think I need to read one of them. I've looked at them, but I haven't really sat down and just read the book to try to understand it. But apparently when we go into the dream state, we're in an original state that's more than what we are when we're awake and conscious. So is the unconscious self aware of everything that I'm doing right now, saying right now? Is it kind of like a guardian angel self? Questions that pop in my mind. Darcy said that she wasted no time informing her uncle exactly where her body lay. A few minutes later, old Fred snorted, got out of bed and yelled to Aunt Zoe, "I know where Darcy is. She came and told me in a dream. Her car went down an embankment, and the deputies haven't been able to see it because it's down in a ditch." Darcy watched while Fred rang up her mother and father and told them to get in their cars, and that she felt her real self being pulled back to her body. Ma Braden didn't argue with her older brother. Fred is as hard-headed as they come. He has never been the least bit mystical. So when he told us that Darcy had just appeared to him in a dream and told him where she lay still alive, we chose not to doubt him for a minute. When the Andersons and the Bradens met at the revealed curve where the dream had said Darcy went off the road, a few elements of doubt surfaced. Interesting. A few elements of doubt surfaced. And I'm reminded of me going over to the beach this last few days. And I wondered, what the heck am I doing this research? 15 years, 6 years making videos. Am I just imagining all this craziness going on? But I guess if I was in Iraq or Ukraine or any one of these other places, Venezuela, I guess I would take it serious. You think? All the horrific suffering going on and death? Is it about to hit the whole world? And President Donald Trump, seems to be intentionally trying to agitate so many people and countries, and Russia and China, Syria, Iran, Venezuela, on and on and on, and everybody. He's playing the part. Interestingly enough, you can go look it up. He had a Kabbalah teacher. Kabbalah is mysticism. Mysticism is witchcraft. So that kind of connects the two, what I'm reading here with the real world we're in, with all the satanic symbols and Emmys and Grammys and football halftime shows and TV programmings, Gotham and Lucifer and Modern Family and so much more. The Lord's Prayer says, lead me not into temptation and deliver me from evil. So I suspect if it says that, we must continuously be tempted, and evil's trying to suck us in. But if you pray to God, lead me not into temptation and deliver me from evil, apparently you can get away from the evil if they snare you. Just saying, I think about these different things when I read books like this and other books and what's going on. It's just so intense and insane that it boggles the mind. But apparently this tells us there's more to reality than we know, and that can be comforting if you get your mind right. And they want to ban the 10 Commandments. I wonder why they want to ban the 10 Commandments and put up a statue of the devil in its place. You think there's something serious about that? I think there is. When the Andersons and the Bradens met at the revealed curve, where the dream had said Darcy went off the road, a few elements of doubt surfaced. There were no skid marks. The guardrail was untouched. We knew that the deputies and we ourselves had been here a dozen times. Howard Braden recalled, but Fred said, come on, damn it. Darcy told me she's way down there in the ditch. Thankfully for Darcy, her parents and her aunt and uncle managed to keep their faith in her appearance in Fred's unusual dream. The 16-year-old was found just where her spirit image had said the physical representation of Darcy Braden would be lying, desperately needing help. Ma Braden called 911 from the nearest farm home, and minutes later an ambulance arrived to take Darcy to the local hospital. For nearly a week, her condition was listed as critical. In addition to dozens of bumps, bruises, and scratches, she has sustained a severe concussion, a fractured leg bone, and 3 broken ribs. Fred Anderson still does not claim to possess any psychic abilities. He just knows that he has always thought the world of his niece, and he agrees with his sister May that he and the child have always enjoyed some special bond. This time, that special love connection and Darcy's out-of-body visit to Fred's dream saved her life. Wow. You can go get this book. Look it up on Abe Books or other used book sites or Amazon or whatever. Maybe it's sold new. A lot of books go out of print, but you can find them on used book sites for a few dollars. If it costs you $5, abebooks.com usually provides free shipping. It's $5 you could have this book, probably. And many others I've gone over. Although a near-death experience is not specifically mentioned in the next case, we feel that it bears including. In this instance, a young boy's precognitive dream of his little brother's death by drowning may actually have prevented an NDE from occurring, a near-death experience. All right, moving on with this story. On the other hand, the 3-year-old in question may indeed have undergone an NDE and not reported it to his parents. Every night for several months, 8-year-old Jimmy Orlowski of Leona, New Jersey, was terrified by the same awful nightmare. He saw his little brother Stephen fall into a deep, dark lake and drown. Oh my. One can imagine with horror the horror that gripped Jimmy's heart when their parents, Francis and Joanne Orlowski, announced Moose Lake in Maine as one of the vacation spots for the summer of 1994. I went up to Moose Lake. I grew up in Maine, and as a teenager moved to Florida. Now I live in the mountains of North Carolina because Maine is too cold and Florida is too hot. But I went up to Moosehead Lake, I think 2008. I had purchased some land up there and I was going to try to escape the reality that I see going on around us, you know, the weirdness, the freaks, propaganda. I found out when I went to Maine and bought some property and rented a house, opened up a business in Bangor, Maine, downtown, that there's no escaping anything. The craziness was there. The homelessness was there. In Maine, where it's freezing. Lunatics walking down the streets, talking to themselves, arguing with themselves. People tattooed or body piercings in their noses and lips and just looking pretty bizarre. But again, talking like that these days, people accuse you of hate speech. The satanic forces seemingly are in charge. FYI. Just mentions Moose Lake here, so I think of these things. As soon as they arrived, Jimmy did his best to keep his little brother away from the water. So Jimmy had a dream again and again and again that his brother drowned in a lake. But then came the fateful morning when Jimmy went down to the pier by himself to try to catch the biggest fish in Moose Lake. Unknown to the solitary fisherman, 3-year-old Stephen had followed him down to the lake shore. The next thing Jimmy knew, he later told the Examiner, there was a splash. When he looked and saw Stephen's head bobbing out of the water, he freaked. There was no way that he would permit the horrifying nightmares of his brother's death by drowning to occur in real life. Jimmy jumped into the lake and swam as fast as he could to his brother, who was already sinking. Then Jimmy recalled, I went under, grabbed him around the waist, lifted him over my head, and then I tried to get to shore. But the danger was not past. The 3-year-old panicked, and as he was struggling in his fear, he began to force Jimmy's head under the water. I was in trouble, Jimmy said. I couldn't hold my breath anymore, so I came up and screamed for help. Alerted to something awry at the lakefront, Francis and Joan came running and pulled their sons out of the lake. None the worse for wear after the rescue, Jimmy said that all that mattered was that his beloved little brother Stephen, well-being. He knew that his worries and nightmares were now over. So again, we speculate that Jimmy's reoccurring nightmare to have been a life-saving premonition that may have prevented 2 children's near-death experiences. The next chapter, the healing ministries of angels. Personally, this is a personal story, but I've had a lot of psychic experiences in my life. And I'm sure if you're watching this video, you can relate to this. But I would think about somebody, and I would be with my friend, maybe Dave or something, and I would mention somebody else, Joe, that we used to know. And then out of nowhere, and this happened to me more than once, those old flip phones we used to have, my phone would ring, and it would be that person. And my friend Dave would look at me and go, wow, that was weird. And not just once, many times. And one time I had these restless nights, 3 or 4 nights in a row. I just couldn't sleep. I kept having difficulty, and I didn't understand. And it was a warning about something that happened later on, that when it did happen, I realized what the dream was. The dream was a warning to me. Warning me of the suffering and this incident that was going to happen in the future. That did happen. But I could only relate to it later on. It's an interesting story. Maybe someday I'll share it. But it did cause me a lot of pain and suffering for years. And I had those restless nights sleep for 3 or 4 days prior to it happening. And so much more. But I believe we're all spiritual, so psychic experiences are probably normal. And if you've been watching my book reviews, even To Eliminate the Opate by Rabbi Marvin Antelman, the leader of the Jewish Congress of America, so no small guy. He was the leader of the Jewish Congress of America, Rabbi Marvin Antelman. You can go look up my books, To Eliminate the Opate. And what that means, the opate is like a drug. When you believe in God, or you know stuff like in this book, and you know where to put your trust and your behavior, and you can know that that will protect you, like Jesus said, he who believed in me shall be saved. And I'm not trying to be a preacher. I began this research with no idea where I would wind up. If you go watch my videos, you can see. I did not know in the beginning what I know now. Lose my train of thought. So it is interesting, these psychic experiences we all have. And the world we're living in right now, with the looming fear and devastation and threats. Again, like I was saying, you have to keep your faith, and it's almost like an armor. You can protect yourself and be sure of yourself. Don't doubt yourself. That seems to be a reoccurring theme in this video. When I went on vacation, I'm like at the beach with all these people having a good time. And to be honest, I spent most of my life on the water in Florida. I had a house 1 block from the beach with a swimming pool. So you can imagine barbecues, friends, walking across the street to the beach, or down to the marina with my big sailboat, 32-foot Morgan, that I've sailed to the Bahamas. Quite the life. And so here I am up in the mountains, 8-9 hours away from the beach, and then I'm at the beach and I see everything and the big yachts and the big boats, and it causes me to go, what have I done for the past 15 years? Was I crazy to give all that up? And then I think about the videos and all the comments I get from people, and what I've learned and what I know, and the strengthening of my faith and my belief. And I do believe that the evil forces will pull off another huge event like Pearl Harbor or 9/11, and a lot of people won't know what to believe or think. So I think I've done the right thing by making the videos, and I will continue to do so. But we all can have a little doubt. We can wonder what we're doing. Let's just get out there and go have fun and live our lives. But meanwhile, people everywhere are dying, and in Venezuela with the embargo is suffering, starving, and they won't even allow outside people to donate foods and supplies. The evil forces are very sinister. What kind of entity can even do all these things that they're doing? And all these new weapons they talk about in a press release today or yesterday. A supersonic, unstoppable missile with a nuclear warhead. It can actually affect us and give us a sense of hopelessness. But yet again, our spiritual self is just right there if we had spiritual eyes to see it and understand and pray and talk to it. So maybe this video does have a meaning, and that maybe more of us need to realize this spiritual world is there, and we need to pray and communicate, pick up a Bible, have belief, have faith against all obstacles when people call you crazy and everything. Because if we don't step up, who will step up? And when you do wind up in the next world, if there's a blinding flash and a nuclear explosion in the city, and you're gone, you're dead, they can only kill your physical body, and you wind up in the heavenly realm, you have to answer. Did you try to do something? What did you believe? With all that said, thank you for watching my video. I think I'll make this a shorter video than 2 hours. I've been trying to make this video for 3 or 4 days. I actually made 40 minutes at a pier in New Bern, outside the really nice hotel where I was staying. But the wind was so bad it kept making my voice all crackled. You couldn't understand me. So I had to read this book and make the video for the second time and delete the other files. Anyways, you can get this book or many other of Brad Steiger's books. You know, you have to ask yourself, with Brad Steiger, Sherry Steiger, and all these other books I have, and the UFOs and aliens, I think there's a little bit of truth in all of the books, but we just need to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. The spiritual world does appear to exist. People can show up and show themselves to us. We can have out-of-body experiences. And this world, for whatever's going to happen, prophesied even by Albert Pike in the 1880s, that 3 world wars would be required to bring about the New World Order. And apparently, according to prophecy, even in the Bible, there's supposed to be some kind of entity, an antichrist, and they want to steal Christian souls. They want to steal souls from heaven and get them to go to the underworld in Hades. And like the Lord's Prayer says, lead me not into temptation and deliver me from evil. It does seem to kind of put the pieces of the puzzle together. We need to try to be better people. And Jesus said, apparently, if you believe in me, you will be saved. So apparently he came with that message, and he added a commandment that we are to love one another. So no matter what happens, very important thing here, do not hate anybody. In my videos, I can say that these people are doing it. These evil, Kabbalistic people into witchcraft are bringing us 911 and world wars and pain and suffering and all kinds of sacrificial rituals everywhere. But we are not to join them and become haters also. And they're throwing the homosexual, gay pride, transgender, all this propaganda, and even sexualizing little children. They're trying to push our buttons and make us angry and hateful. And then they will have accomplished their goal. They would have helped us steal our own soul from heaven and go join them in the hate and destruction. Very complicated puzzle. You think? So thanks for watching the video. Rick Miracle reporting.
U.S. strikes on Iran approved by Trump, then abruptly pulled back. Iran's many drones. Iran has put a lot of its energy into understanding how to best use drones in a military fight, and there is no doubt for any of the countries that know anything about Iran that Iran will use drones in its military attack.
Interestingly enough, I was thinking, how would Iran use drones in a military attack? probably delivering viruses or biological plague type weapons. Oh my. Why are they pushing so hard, the USA, the Pentagon, Israel, etc., for this war with Iran? Maybe they want to have a depopulation event.
No questions about this, and it's going to probably be more surprising than one can imagine for many, many reasons, which I'm not going to go through all of them right now. So what is the conclusion? Yes, there will be a war with Iran. Yes, probably Shiaism will be to a great degree disrupted and destroyed because of the Jews taking over Iran. And Jews of Asfahan will increase from 10,000 currently to 70,000. Okay, and this will be a great war that will the world will not be the same after this war. The world.
I wonder how many people think about this. If they have this war with Iran, and Russia and China side with Iran, information that's been in the news lately, Brazil sides with them, and how many other countries all over the world will side with them against America? Do you think it's part of the plan? It seems like it.
The world will not be the same after this war. The world will not be the same after this war. This is why I have to beg the United States that please do not do this for the state of Israel. Do not do this. In 1988, the U.S. bombed down an Iranian civilian plane in which more than 200 people died. Iran didn't do anything, because Iran has been trying to keep the peace and not stir things with the U.S. more than there needs to be. When it is not in the interest of Iran to do things that are recently being said about Iran, to bomb their ships or to shoot down the drones. First of all, drones shouldn't be there. You shouldn't be spying on other people. It's wrong. But Iran's policy has been, try to keep the peace if you can. That's why Iran did a sellout nuclear deal. But again, that wasn't good enough. For Israel, it was not good enough because it was still a threat to the greater Israeli plan. And
so they keep talking about Greater Israel. Go on Yahoo Images and look up Greater Israel. They have a map of this country from the Euphrates River in Iraq down to the Nile River in Egypt, returning to the ancient property lines of the Kingdom of Judea thousands of years ago. This is serious business.
And now Israel wants the U.S. to do this war. And really, the U.S. should not do this war. The U.S. should just concentrate on its own economics, not go into another war that is going to really, really put the U.S. in a very difficult situation. So, just to wrap up, two things. The Jews in Isfahan will increase. Why will they increase? Then they will be the followers of Dajjal. Number one.
Do you know who Dajjal is? It's a demon being prophesied in the Iranian or the Islamic religions, kind of parallel to Armageddon and the Leviathan, destroyer, demon, antichrist being mentioned in Christianity, etc. All this stuff lines up. Go watch this clip with Sheikh Omar Baloch and open your mind. We're in trouble. We need to wake up, and soon. They're moving ahead rather quickly, like a runaway freight train, to bring us World War III. Rick Marico reporting.
And since you just pointed to the 9/11 Commission report, there's an understanding that the primary motivation for 9/11 was U.S. support for Israel's brutal oppression of the Palestinians, also conveyed in the 9/11 Commission report. I guess my question is, how are these two incidents, or theories, so to say, related? And, there are those that will brush off your argument as a conspiracy theory. Are you concerned?
I don't think that's so much of a conspiracy theory. I was smiling when you said that, because to tell a bit of a story on this, back in the early 80s, when I was in Washington at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of our visitors for a luncheon talk was a young gentleman then named Francois Heisbourg. Heisbourg was the special assistant to French President Francois Mitterrand. And I don't know how the subject came up, but he said, Americans never see conspiracies anywhere. We French, he said, we see conspiracies everywhere. And both of us are wrong. This is not a conspiracy in the sense that it is usually used, the word is usually used, which is to denigrate an opposing argument. When someone in the United States says that that's a conspiracy or that's a conspiracy theory, by definition they mean it is irrational, illegitimate, and without proof. All I would suggest to people is that you look at the films of WTC-7, that third tower going down on September 11th. You look and listen to the reports on September 11th with the secondary explosions. These are not fantasies. They happened. You look at the reports on September 12th of the apprehension of Israelis with vans of explosives and cameras filming the events on September 11. These are not fantasies. And you look at the people riddling the American government, all of the Middle East people in State Defense and the National Security Council, Deputy Secretary of Defense Paul Wolfowitz, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Douglas Feith, who used to be a friend of mine, by the way, from Philadelphia. These people were all part of the neoconservative movement. Many of these people are dual U.S.-Israeli nationals. All of their primary allegiance is to Israel. But I began to have suspicions about what had happened on 9/11 about 2 weeks after the attacks. There were several discontinuities that made no sense to me whatsoever. The behavior on the part of some of the named terrorists, these 19 Arabs on 4 planes, running around flying schools like loose cannon, not having the pilot skills to fly the aircraft, no recognition for what they had done afterwards in their own area, their own community. And it struck me that for many reasons, none of the arguments that were being given for what they did made any sense. But I then immediately forgot about it until about 2 years ago. And then I came across a video which I found to be extremely disturbing. That video was an interview with a Dutch demolitions expert named Danny Jowenko. And it concerned the collapse of the third World Trade Center tower to go down on September 11th. This was the 47-story World Trade Center 7, the third tallest building at the World Trade Center. Jowenko had never heard of it. Neither had I. And when you looked at the building, you saw that there was effectively no damage to any face of the building. It had not been hit by a plane. It had not been taken major trauma from debris, and it went straight down into its own footprint in about 7 seconds in what was visibly a controlled demolition. And it was pretty clear that whatever those 19 named Arabs on 4 planes, 2 of them at the World Trade Center, had or had not done, they could not have had any possible effect on that third building going down. Shortly after that, I came across, partly out of my own curiosity, which this definitely aroused, and a very extensive video, both of which I've cited, by the way, in some of my recent articles, which were taken on 9/11 itself from what became Ground Zero, the base of World Trade Center 1 and 2, the Twin Towers, involving police, emergency services personnel, newspaper and television correspondents, and you can see and hear secondary explosions at the base of the World Trade Center buildings. Now, planes impacting at 800 to 1,000 feet above the ground are not going to cause secondary explosions at the ground floor. And this followed over into other reports, also there on September 11th, about vans in the area, white vans. In one case, a van was picked up by police and people arrested at the access to a major bridge. The van was filled with explosives, and the two people in it were Israelis. In Bergen, New Jersey, same day, a van with several people in it had set up cameras. Before the first plane hit, they were filming the Twin Towers, and they were celebrating. High fives. It was a good thing for them. Residents called police. Police arrested them. All 5 were Israelis. What intrigued me, in addition to angering me, was that within days, all of these reports disappeared from the media. Most Americans don't know that a third building went down at the World Trade Center. Most have never heard about the secondary explosions reported by CNN, ABC, Fox, and others at the foundation of World Trade Center 1 and 2. None have ever heard about the vans. So I began looking at this very carefully, and one of the things that I began looking at was just what would it have taken for a special operations group of any particular nationality to have done 9/11, either by having taken control of the operation we have been told about, of the 19 named Arabs on 4 planes, or having run a parallel operation where you have 4 planes being hijacked, but there's another operation being done with those in concert. And I picked up 3 particular factors that would need to be taken into account. One was motivation, a second was expertise, and the third, the critical one, was access. Now, when it came to motivation, it's probably a very sad commentary on where we are in the world today, that there are an awful lot of countries and groups out there in the world that have either real or contrived reasons to hate America. It wasn't that way when I was a young man, but then many things weren't the same way now as they were when I was a young man. But almost all of the groups and countries that might want to do this only had a negative reason for doing it. They wanted to hurt us. The Israelis had a positive reason, and it's one that a number of their supporters had talked about from the 1990s on up, and what was called the Project for a New American Century, whose members included, by the way, later Vice President Richard Cheney, later Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, and many of the so-called neoconservatives, most of them Jewish but not all, who came into the first Bush administration. Israel had a positive reason, and was get the United States involved in a war in the Middle East with a powerful, enraged, anti-Islamic strain within the American public, that they needed a catalytic event to produce this. They even talked about it in terms of another Pearl Harbor is needed to bring the American people into this fight. The second was expertise. Lots of expertise out there. Bringing buildings down and controlled demolitions is something that almost any intelligence agency of any country in the world can do or can contract. There are many private agencies that do this. But one thing is absolutely clear. Neither those 19 named Arabs on the plane nor Al-Qaeda as an organization had the expertise, the technical expertise to do that. And there is one very clear proof of that. If Al-Qaeda and its affiliates had had the ability to wire even one building for a controlled demolition at the World Trade Center, much less all three of them, the so-called green zone in the heart of Baghdad would have been a pile of rubble. And it wasn't. But the last is access. The World Trade Center security was an Israeli-owned company. Security at all three of the airports from which the 4 aircraft on 9/11 departed, ICTS, was an Israeli security company. That security company, by the way, also had security at the airports in Paris and Amsterdam later, from which the so-called shoe and underwear bombers departed. The security company at the World Trade Center had 24/7 state-of-the-art electronic surveillance and foot patrols. Wiring a building for a controlled demolition, and I must confess here, this is not my specialty. I have heard what people who do this for a living have said about it, but it is not my specialty. But the description of it in the video of Danny Jawenko that I mentioned to you is a very good one on this. And he described it in which if you needed to do it in a few hours, you would need 30 to 40 people, fewer if you had more time, cutting open the walls, literally cutting open the walls, all the way around the building, implanting the explosives, running detonator cord and cable, wires to put them to a control system, coordinating all of this activity. This is not something that involves the casual bringing in of a briefcase and leaving it at the foot of a building's elevator and going out again. This is extensive work, and it would require the type of extensive sustained access that could not go unremarked by the security forces in place on this. They also needed the ability to evade an apprehension and to have their escape concealed. And they had that done. All of the Israelis who were apprehended in those vans were later released in about 2 months at the direction of Michael Chertoff, then the second director of Homeland Security, a dual U.S.-Israeli national. There is no mention of them in the mainstream media, which is largely Zionist-owned. All of the major networks, all of the major national newspapers, all 3 of the weekly news magazines, all of the major political journals, most of the major publishing houses. It simply didn't happen. The only thing that happened on 9/11 that was discussed in the media, that have been accepted by the government, that was described in the 9/11 Commission, are 19 named Arabs on 4 planes bringing down 2 buildings. And the rest of it, in Orwellian terms, has become a non-event and a non-story.
And since